Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I do find it quite interesting, Mr Speaker, that someone who was on the select committee that heard all these submissions, that proposes to be passionate about this bill, that represents the government, that has an interest in this bill, stands up and speaks for about 5 minutes on a reasonably important piece of legislation, Mr Speaker. I wonder if that's because that member over there simply has no plan, has no idea how the bill actually works, and doesn't actually have an understanding of what the bill's about. Because, Mr Speaker, I would have thought that if that member had an idea of what the bill was about, because this is a reasonably controversial piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, a reasonably controversial piece of legislation, I would have thought that that member would have stood up in 10 minutes, it's not long, in 10 minutes and tried to sell it to the people of New Zealand. He would have put his best foot forward and explained why that government is putting this piece of legislation through. But he didn't. He either didn't or he couldn't. I suspect his chief whip said to him, Dr. Calder, you need to speak on this for 10 minutes because we're getting a lot of rubbish, we're getting a lot of emails that are bad about this bill, you need to sell this. So he said to the chief whip, I will do that, I will do that. He stood up and after 5 minutes he thought, I can't sell this bill because it's not saleable. What am I going to do? So instead of trying to sell the bill, what he did is he just sat down and he said, Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the House, and he sat down. And after 5 minutes, he couldn't even sell it. So, Mr Speaker, what I will do in 10 minutes is I will attempt to outline the major concerns that the Labour Party has about this bill. Unfortunately, if you'd given me 20 minutes, I'd have used the full 20 minutes to outline the concerns. In fact, Mr Speaker, if you'd given me the full 2 hours, that wouldn't be long enough to outline the concerns that the Labour Party has with this piece of legislation. The main reason, Mr Speaker, is that we care about the environment. We understand what New Zealand's competitive advantage is about. We understand where New Zealand's competitive advantage lies. But, Mr Speaker, what I would like to say is Labour actually did vote for this bill in the first reading. Do you know why? The reason is that we support democracy. Because we actually wanted to know the reason I did is because we wanted to know what the people of New Zealand thought about this. We needed to know what the experts thought about this, where they saw the problems, how they saw this playing out, and to get their ideas. And so we supported the Select Committee because that is where the robust debate happens. And after hearing all the submitters, we knew that this was the wrong piece of legislation, Mr Speaker. It is the wrong piece of legislation for New Zealand. But I must admit, when we did support this, we did have major reservations. We did have major reservations, and they were played out. We were concerned that the Minister would use the EPA as a mechanism for fast-tracking controversial projects through an undemocratically way without adequate consultation. Well, I'll tell you what, Mr Speaker, what happened is they floated the idea of mining the national parks without consultation, but there were 40,000 Kiwis who decided to have some form of consultation. And what did they do? Without any sort of advertising, they marched up Queen Street. They marched up Queen Street and they told the national government, how dare you even consider, how dare the government even consider mining Schedule 4 land? Because those people, Mr Speaker, understood where New Zealand's competitive advantage lay. They knew that New Zealand's competitive advantage lay in our pristine environment, in our regulatory framework that made sure that the environment was protected. This does not do that. This does not do that, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, Labour's concerns were reinforced at the Select Committee, and we decided to oppose this bill. We decided to oppose this bill. And I can tell you, Mr Speaker, when it comes to policy, when it comes to vision, there will be only one party that the people of New Zealand will listen to. Because, Mr Speaker, the party over there does not have a vision, does not have a policy. They have legislation that will fast-track through economic policy like mining national parks. The Minister asked what our policy is. Well, I can tell you what our policy isn't. It is not mining national parks. I can say to the people of New Zealand, I can say to the Greens, I can say to anyone who will listen, Labour will not mine Schedule 4 land. Labor will not have a Minister of Economic Development that stands up in this House and says, we need to mine our national parks. That is what we will not do. And I'll tell you the other thing which we will not do. We will not have an agency in place that's answerable to the people, to just the Minister, because we know that when it comes to this sort of stuff, the people of New Zealand demand the right to consult. The functions of the EPA are too narrow. They're just too narrow. It just won't provide the environmental sector with any sort of leadership. And you, Mr. Speaker, do you know why I'm right? Because the Minister will not, he is trying too hard to defend this piece of legislation. He knows this is wrong. He's an environmental engineer. I think the Minister may even have a doctorate in environmental engineer. How far he has come in terms of protecting the environment. The Minister lives in an area of pristine, it's one of the nicest places outside of Hawke's Bay in the country. And yet he's sponsoring a bill which could potentially destroy that. And there is only one thing that the people of Nelson will tell him. Thank you, Dr. Smith, but no thanks. I predict Marianne Street will be the next MP for that area. I predict that is what will happen. The EPA's objectives are inadequate. They are just inadequate. They do not even expressly require the EPA to actually protect the environment. The Labor Party will have a policy where the environment comes first. We're living in the 21st century. This is the 21st century where environmental actually means something, where water quality stands for something, where air quality means something, where the people of New Zealand demand accountability from the ministers, from government. And this has taken that away, Mr. Speaker. Who would believe that the Minister for the Environment would sponsor a bill which does not even expressly require the EPA to actually protect the environment? Instead, as the bill is currently worded, the objective of the EPA is to undertake its functions in a way that, quote, contributes to the efficient, effective and transparent management of New Zealand's environment and national and physical resources and enables New Zealand to meet its international obligations. Now, I think the way that Jerry Brown has interpreted the efficient, effective and transparent management of New Zealand's environment, he's interpreted that to mean you can take diggers in and you can dig it up. You can mine our Schedule 4 land. You can mine our competitive advantage. You can send the message to all those around the world that New Zealand just doesn't care because we take for granted what the rest of the world requires. I lived in Japan for a year, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell you after living in a city like that, you really come to appreciate the beauty that is this wonderful country. You really come to understand that New Zealand's competitive advantage is our countryside, is our national parks, is our clear water, is our clean air. And yet, this bill does nothing to protect our international competitive advantage. It is just another case of the fact that the government actually has no plan. Mr. Speaker, I have come to the conclusion that that government, and the Minister in particular, has lost touch with reality. The Minister doesn't understand what New Zealanders want. The Minister doesn't understand what New Zealanders value, because this bill doesn't reflect that at all. It is not sufficiently independent from its Minister, especially on has-no issues. In fact, its independence is reduced. It is reduced. And I wonder if this is just another feature to allow the fast-tracking of mining in national parks. In fact, I think this is leading to this. This is leading to this. In fact, I think if Nick Smith is in charge of this, we will see Schedule 4 land mined, and there won't even be a chance for the people of New Zealand, to march up Queen Street, because before they know it, the bulldozers will be there. And that's a disgrace, Mr. Speaker. It's a disgrace, as this bill is. This legislation is confusing, it denies our competitive advantage, and Labor certainly does not support a bill that actually is out of touch with what the vast majority of New Zealanders want. Mr. Speaker, I will not be supporting this bill, neither will the Labor Party. Thank you very much.
Chris Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This Environmental Protection Authority Bill takes another step to deliver on a